Hello, welcome to this video. This video is going to be called Why Should You Learn a Musical Instrument? Question mark. That's what I'm going to call this video. I've been shooting videos this morning. I didn't plan to do this. It's just sort of popped in my head. At the moment, I'm very involved in teaching music. I'm teaching young musicians, how to perform, how to play. I'm teaching a whole bunch of really young drummers. Trying to get them better. Last night I was actually out overseeing a gig where we had a bunch of really young kids, some of the kids as young as 9 years old, getting up on stage. And what were they playing? They was playing songs by Queen, by Metallica, Seven Nation Army, all that type of stuff, a whole bunch of music that goes back 20, 30, in some cases 40, 50 years. I think at one point some of the kids played Paranoid by Black Sabbath, which was recorded, was that 1970? So we're talking 52 years ago. Kids are still learning instruments. Yes, they are, that without a doubt. But it's different to when I came up. I think the motivations to play music are different. But it does bring in the question, is it really worth learning a music instrument now? If you put the radio on and you listen to any contemporary music, that music has not been created by instrumentalists. People like Rick Beato on his channel, when he reviews the top 10 Spotify tracks or the top 10, TikTok tracks, he will rejoice if he could find a bit of guitar playing on a record. Records aren't made like that anymore. The vast majority of contemporary music is created by computers. Now, for people who don't know what that means, I'm going to tell you what that means. Most music computers have a keyboard, and that keyboard is used for inputting information. Right? Those of you who think producers can sit there and play tunes, some of them can. So keyboard playing exists in the industry. But there's many producers nowadays that may not know what a C major chord is. Okay, they will be using the keyboard primarily to input information. They will use it to input bass lines, drum parts. Now, I was sat behind a kid yesterday in class, and he was creating a track in Logic. And this is a 16-year-old kid. He wasn't using the keyboard at all. He was inputting the information in the step right matrix editor on the computer. And what he was doing was almost like I was watching him. He was putting in, sort of random notes, listening back, and then moving them into the right place to get the sound he wanted. And that's the keyboard is there, but it's used as one of many devices to input information into the computer, which is then manipulated by the computer, by Logic or Pro Tools or FL Studio or Cubase or whatever it is the program they're using, Ableton Live. You're able to manipulate that. It's just stuff that you manipulate. You could also pull samples in from outside and you can manipulate those. But one thing I want to mention that people aren't aware of is you could also go on the internet and download MIDI packs. Now, what MIDI packs are pre-programmed MIDI information, usually chord progressions. Today, as a modern producer, you don't need to create chord progressions. You can just go and buy them and download them. So you bring your chord progression in, you drop it into your DAW, you move the chords around to the place you want it to be. You then select the sound. In a lot of cases, the sounds you select are what are called flex sounds or time-based sounds. So they will do something. You can just put a chord in and it will change that chord into a bass line. The computer will analyze that and turn that harmonic information, and this has really come from jazz, but the computer could do it, will turn that into a pizzicato string arrangement, or it might turn it into a funky jazz strumming on guitar. All right? You could so what we have here is out there on the internet are chord progressions that you could grab, and then when you drop them into the system will turn it into sounds. What all you are doing is acting almost like a music fan, a listener, and editing them. I like that, I don't like that, I'm going to put that with that. Same thing with drum beats. You don't need to be able to program the drum beats. You can go and get the drum beats. You could take a drum beat from here and a chord progression from here, and you can put it into the computer, and the computer will intelligently go, well, I can do this with the drum beat. I can cut fills in, I can cut this in, I can do that, I can do this with the chord progression. Okay? It's much more, as a producer, it's just about choice. It's just about going, I quite like that, I don't want that. Editing. Anybody who's a music fan could do it. You don't have to be a trained musician. And you definitely don't need to be able to play an instrument to do any of this. Vocals, again, a singer nowadays can sing into a computer. The computer can take that and entirely restructure that vocal into anything you want. We're not just talking about tuning them in. We can take the note and flatten it and add vibrato at the end. We can get that note to bend to another note. We can get that note to change any pitch to follow any harmony you want. Most harmony vocals are created nowadays by taking the main vocal and then copying it 3 or 4 times and then just repitching and re-editing it so it sounds like harmony vocals. Though if you don't know your harmony, again, you can use those MIDI packs to create the harmony vocals. You don't need to know theory. You don't need to know how to play an instrument. You don't need to worry about ranges of instruments or what instruments do. All that has gone. And when you put the radio on and listen to contemporary music, that is what you're hearing. Now, all this process, because the computer is so involved in this, the computers can actually see what human beings are trying to do. And you could set up, and this is where AI comes in, and this is a big discussion of the future of music, is will computers actually be able to create music entirely? Right. So could a computer, right, sit there looking at a Spotify playlist, looking at what people are listening to and what is popular, and then go, I can see the algorithms and demographics here. Let's just grab this stuff and do it. So I've got the MIDI information, I've got the chord progression there. It was that type of drum beat. I will, we have software that can create voices. We can emulate different voices. So what singer should we have? Should we have Madonna with like a Prince chord progression and that drum beat from Daft Punk, and we'll put it all together, and here's a stock arrangement that people like, and before you know it, music is being created and produced by computers, right? And there's a huge want to do this because the record companies, they're what they're trying to do is break their artists by putting them onto Spotify playlists, right? So Spotify can really make or break a track. Now the money is made from the plays. If there's millions of plays on a track, then that will create money. So why not just have a computer emulating what people like in the real world and just throwing those onto Spotify playlists, just generating money? Would people notice it? Well, apparently they won't, because they're listening to it now. Right? The human element has really gone from music. We're listening to computers now. So my question, is it really worthwhile learning a musical instrument? Well, I can attest to the fact that kids still are. Now, the motivation I don't understand. I've got a rough idea, and I'm now going to try and go through that, but I'm going to go through my motivation to play an instrument. When I grew up, there were gods, and those gods weren't film stars or celebrities. They were rock stars. And the rock stars were out of reach. You didn't necessarily see them on the television. You get into music, you discover a band like Led Zeppelin, you buy a Led Zeppelin album, the whole thing's mysterious. And there may be a photograph of Led Zeppelin, and you look at these, and these are the gods, and you aspire to be that. And it's a mystery. That mystery that was in rock music goes right back to characters like Robert Johnson. It goes back to charismatic musicians like Elvis Presley. So there was a lot to aspire to. You knew if you could learn the instrument, then perhaps you could be like them. There was the dream that you would learn the instrument, then you would meet a friend. And this is all part of the folklore of rock and roll, that you would meet a friend who played guitar, and you would get in the garage and you would start jamming, and magic would happen, and that would take you on a journey. It's what I call the Cinderella theory of rock and roll. That you have this innate talent, and all you need to do is to grab a guitar and it will come out. It's what's almost spoiled music criticism. I rail against it on this channel because it's the idea that any music that's created by anybody with any real talent is should sort of be discounted. It's this innate talent that needs to be exposed just because someone's got learnt three chords and three chords of the truth, and that will expose all that to the world. And I don't think it's like that. I think even bands like AC/DC and Status Quo that get seen as being simplistic is actually, that's like nuclear physics of rock and roll. It's so hard to do what they do, but this is another discussion. The point is here is there was a big motivation, especially for me, in that post-punk era of going, get behind a drum kit and you can achieve this sort of Nietzschean godlike status within the world that you live. You could stand there and you could see these people, and everybody aspires to be that at the time, and that would drive you to become a musician. For me, that turned into a sort of a worship of the technical ability of certain musicians as I got into it and discovered, God, John Bonham's really doing that, Ian Pace is really doing that, and then, oh my God, Billy Cobham's doing that, Steve Gadd's doing that. That journey, for me, was the biggest thing in my life, to try and get close to those musicians. And nowadays it's completely bizarre because through social networking we are close to those musicians. Of all the drummers that I ever grew up listening to, my idol in the end was Narada Michael Walden. He was my absolute idol as a drummer. My favourite drummer. I wanted to play like him, I wanted to sound like him, I wanted to play in a band like the Mahavishnu Orchestra and make that sound. And now, through all of this, and me talking to a camera, I have made contact with Narada, right? You can watch a video of me talking to him. This is all really quite bizarre to me, the way the world has changed. Kids growing up now, I think it's something different. I think most kids have got no interest in the guitar, the bass and drums. They're listening to music where that doesn't figure at all, and they don't understand it whatsoever. There's a small minority of kids whose parents have brought them up on Oasis or Nirvana or whatever it is, and they are picking up an interest in this from their parents. This is almost like the complete opposite of what I grew up with. My dad was a drummer, but he was a jazz drummer. He looked down on rock and roll and rock music, and I was sort of brought up being told that this was a terrible choice to make, to play rock and roll drums, that rock music was just all druggies and it will be, get you nowhere. Little did the people know back in the 70s, this form of music, had only been around for 10, 15 years, you see. Was it a flash in the pan? Well, it wasn't a flash in the pan, but it didn't last forever. There was a shift, there was a change. That shift started, I believe, in the late 90s. I think around about the millennium, popular music shifted back to what it had been before pre-rock and roll, which was light, fluffy songs that just entertained young people and old people, and that's all it was. I think the thing that had been in popular music, which was the blues, through Dylan and then the Beatles, the idea that something could be expressed politically or culturally through popular music that was heavy, or the fact that something musically advanced could be transmitted through popular music, like a band like Steely Dan, that idea fell away. I really think it's the jazz and blues as a form lost its purchase on popular music. So if you look at a singer like, I don't know, Chris Cornell, or we look at a singer like Chaka Khan, or we look at a singer like Michael Jackson or Prince, those are dripping, all those singers are dripping with jazz and blues. That falls away in the 90s. Also, the advent of digital technologies, which changes the way you record music, right? Because the dream that I grew up in was a very hard dream to get your actual hands on. Because you could form your band in your garage, but you're going to have to spend a lot of money on instruments to get there. I can remember I started playing the drums in 1980 because I owned some drumsticks. I got a drum kit in 1982 after 2 years of playing cushions, because my dad had to pull together the money to buy the kit, and when he bought that second-hand kit, it was almost like a couple of weeks' wages for him. And then all you had were the instruments. You didn't have a PA, all right? There wasn't rehearsal rooms back then like they have now. You would have to drive up to the big city to rehearse, and I was too little to do that. But the idea that your band could go to a recording studio and record any of these songs, that they could release them to get them out there, that was a dream. Okay? What the computers did is they enabled anyone to do that. They democratized the process that used to be owned by the record labels. And in doing that, it enabled musicians to get their stuff out there. And you might be able to get your stuff out there, and it may not be a success, but you can still get your stuff out there, which satisfies an expressive part of any creative musician. But the other thing is you don't now need to learn to play the drums and then meet someone who plays the bass and then meet someone who plays the guitar and the keyboards and get in a room and write together. You can, download a program onto your phone now that will create music. And it will create the type of music that the industry has put out there. And this is very important. To be a success, in some part, you have to emulate the sounds that everyone is comfortable with. At one point it was a rock band, and every hit record had guitar, bass and drums on. Now it's not. Now you can have a hit record with nobody playing on it. You can sing into a microphone and not be able to sing, and then tune your voice in, and that tuned in vocal sound has become the sound that's accepted. I have to say this to my singers: you may be able to sing, right, but the sound that's accepted out there in the mainstream has been tuned in. Even if the person could sing. An example of this is Michael Bublé. It just shocks me that a guy that can sing as well as he does has his vocals tuned in, because the audience expect that sound. Someone like Adele, whose last single sort of shocked the world because she allowed her voice to just not be tuned, and there was some sort of microtonic stuff, and you had all these stupid videos on the internet where people are saying that she's singing microtonic. No, she's just singing. All singing is microtonic. It's called feel, right? It's called feel. Drummers in the old days, they used to drum, and if you listen to them, they were a little bit out of time. They sped up and they slowed down, and sometimes when they hit the snare drum, it wasn't quite on the grid. It was off. It was called feel, right? Guitarists would hit a note, and when they hit that note, the angst and anger, they would press on that note and they would bend that note. It comes from the blues, and all those notes they bend that they got out of the guitar. Smells Like Teen Spirit. What's that note? That's an expression of emotion. Right? This is what instrumentalists can do. This is what we've lost from music. But the fact is the audience out there don't care. This is the problem, because they don't know. They don't care because they don't know. And the reason why it's happening is because the economics is such that it's a lot easier to do it that way. All right? And people miss out. They miss out. They miss out on this stuff. So, is it worth bothering to go through the effort and motivational energy required to learn an instrument, which most people can't do? Is it worth going on that journey? My argument is yes, because regardless of what's going on right now, this stuff is of value. Okay? It's of value. All right? One of the things that the internet has done is it's made the written word, the concise written word, which we could call poetry, so important. That's what Twitter is. It's made the art of talking, what I'm doing right now, talking to camera and just speaking, it has created superstars of people who do this, right? Who would have thought that that was going to be the case 25, 30 years ago? Music does not fare so well on the internet, right? The reason is is because when you listen to music, you have two ways of listening to music. You can either treat it as a threat because you don't know it, and that's what we do. And the way when we listen to music for the first time, we don't attempt to enjoy that, because enjoyment of art is something that you have to throw your attention towards. Right? If you walk into an art gallery and you don't bother to look at that Rembrandt, you won't enjoy it. You have to focus your attention on it. And you have to focus your attention on it with the idea that you're going to grasp from it the pleasure. If when we approach music we don't know, we don't treat it like that. We treat it as a threat. Right? And so music, which is often muted, is rolling by us. Pictures are rolling by us, and we can see that and then go, oh, do I know that or don't I know that? Am I going to treat that as a threat or as something that I'm going to enjoy? Because they're the two ways that we take in the world. Music doesn't act like that. Something pops up and there's no music there. You have to click on it and unmute it, and then you have to listen to it. And then music's time-based. You can't just get it like a artwork in an instant. It's not like a sentence you can read and get the meaning of. You have to spend time with it. And all this is not conducive, but what does the future hold? Is it going to be the case that music finds a purchase elsewhere? I believe it has on YouTube. I believe that me doing this channel has brought a whole bunch of people that are all joined together in their love of a certain type of music. And I think if I said, check this out, because you like this, so you might like that, people will go through that process and they will come out listening to new music that they like. I think this is the thing that's going on at the moment. Who's to know what's going to happen? But I tell you something, that thing that I described, right? The lack of perfection that real instrumentalists do, the expression of humanity through the fact that we're not perfect, and finding the balance point between perfectionism and an emotionalism feel. That is what musicians do better than anyone else. And that's a valuable thing to humanity. And I'm sure it won't go away. And these kids that I see out there that I'm teaching that are still doing it, they are holding this like a little esoteric holy grail forward. It will be there in the future. So that is my thoughts on, is it worth learning a musical instrument nowadays? My answer is yes, of course it is. But the motivations are different, and the motivations may not be as strong for many people, but they're still there, and we need to focus on the feeling that we get from music. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.